We live? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are live on YouTube. Let's go ahead and take our seats. We'll go ahead and get started here. Okay, we'll go ahead and get going with the Department of Agriculture. Our agency updates, Director Miyamoto, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Agriculture, and who I have with me today is Julie Cook. She's the manager of our administration division. Any questions about personnel or budget? That's the right person to look to. And then I also have with me today Slade Franklin. He is the Weed and Pest Coordinator for the Department of Agriculture. You'll see in your agenda that we have submitted a biennial report that's due to this body. And so kind of the way that I had envisioned in my mind presenting our information today was to use the first half of our time kind of going through a general overall agency update. You guys have any questions at any time, I'm happy to try to answer those however it works best for you. So are we ready with the presentation? Everybody have the information that we submitted? Okay. Well, on that first slide, I'll just go through the department, kind of segment it out as divisions and just kind of let you know the latest and greatest. New updates of information, anything that's going on, any updates that I think are, current events for this body to be aware. I'll just kind of let you know. So this first slide just gives you an indication of where we're at today, the snapshot of the budget overall. It gives you an idea of the size of staff. We, like everybody else, are dealing a little bit with personnel retention issues. We have some turnover issues that we're dealing with. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that, but it's one of the things that's going on right now. We just seem to be constantly interviewing for job applications and trying to find qualified candidates to fill those. So if you go into the second page, this gives you an idea of how the department is structured, some of our affiliates, and it shows you how the department's broken down by division. And so when I talk about the status of personnel, one of the things that worries me a little bit is really in those technical capacities. So the personnel that we have that are working at the Analytical Services Lab that require accreditations or certifications for some kind of technical capacity, or those that we have working as like meat inspectors as an example, those special qualifications are somewhat more difficult for us to find qualified candidates for. And so we're working hard at that. And I'll get more into the specifics on both of those technical capacities later in the presentation. But generally speaking, from the overall standpoint of budget and personnel management, that's where we stand today within the department. Next slide, please. All right, so I think most of the committee is aware Analytical Services Lab is upstairs of the State Vet Lab over in Laramie. It's on the campus of the University of Wyoming and does a lot of the analytical analysis for backup of our inspection programs. So sampling for fuel is done at a course level in the field, but if there's any kind of questions about quality of that sample, those will be forwarded to the Analytical Services Lab, and they can take a deeper dive into any of the feeds, fertilizers, fuel that we sample on a normal basis. The Analytical Services Lab also does a lot of the baseline water testing for conservation districts around the state that keep an eye on general surface water quality. We have the capacity there to run those samples, and we do that as well. So well water samples, you have somebody that has drilled a well, wants to know if that water is potable, they can submit it to our lab and we can give you an idea of what's in that water, baseline water quality anything for irrigation, we sample. So that's what the Analytical Services Lab does. You can see fairly stable sample numbers starting to pick up again now. You know, after kind of a depression of a couple of years due to the pandemic and not as much activity going on, we're starting to see more samples rolling into the lab. And as I mentioned, with personnel matters and filling those technical job capacities, I'm hoping that we can find qualified candidates that can run those analytical tests for us, that have the qualifications, so we can keep our workload flowing. It's really important to get those samples in and out quickly.
Mr. Chairman, is this the same lab where you do THC testing for our?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it is. Yeah, all of those raw ag commodities, including, you know, hemp for THC concentration, this is the lab where that happens. Okay, so I alluded to this a little bit. This just gives you a general idea of this, of the quantity of samples that are flowing through that facility over there. We're working very hard to keep the accreditations that we have. That's really important for crops like THC. You have to have accredited labs, and we have to be not certified, but acknowledged by EPA as meeting the accreditation standards, so that we can submit those samples as official THC concentrations for a program that we receive delegated authority from Usda to administer. So the accreditation is really important in a lot of aspects, but that's one of them.
Mr. Chairman, do you have a number of tests you're doing on that THC? And did we have a lot and now we're not so many? I mean, can you give us an idea of maybe what's going on with if they're growing more of them?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I do have an idea of that. You know, the first year that we launched the hemp program, we had a total of, I believe, 26 applicants. And this year, we're a little over a dozen. We're in the 13, 14 range, I believe. The market's been exceptionally volatile for that entire time since we've had, you know, the legislation passed that authorized us as a department to administer that commodity. So we had market volatility anyway, and then with the pandemic and supply chain issues coming up and inability to ship around the world, I think exacerbated that a little bit. So you had a lot of, from what I understand, stockpiles at different farms around the country that were sitting there waiting to be shipped, a lack of processing and a lack of workforce to get those shoved through the system. I think today there's still a backlog, at least for the people that I'm acquaintances with that grow in Laramie County. They have cut back their total acreages. They're still doing that, but not to the degree they were.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Director, a question on THC testing. Do you also test for law enforcement?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we do not currently. If we were asked to do that, we could. We haven't been approached by law enforcement to run any of their samples for anything that they're submitting for THC concentrations due to law enforcement activities. To my knowledge, we don't have any samples yet that they've requested us to run.
And then the lowest levels you can test for THC?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'll have to get back to you on the variation of, I guess, the sensitivity of the test. I'm not sure.
Lower limits, however you categorize that. I asked this because law enforcement I know has an issue with testing to the lower levels. I just wondered what your lab is capable of. That's kind of what I was wondering. If you could get back, that'd be fine. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think given that context, I may be able to provide a little clarity in that the raw hemp that we test as a commodity, the level is 0.3 is the concentration. So 0.3% THC. Typically when you're dealing with marijuana substances in THC, they're aiming for THC levels that are in the 20 to 30% range, so much, much higher. So we should have the sensitivity to do that, but I have been informed by the manager of our Analytical Services Lab when it comes to substances like edibles, gummies, that type of product, you can't just put it in there. The dilutions are tricky. You have to get it down to where it's really a liquid and an extraction and then put it through. So there's quite a bit more manipulation, but the sensitivities on our equipment are as good as were available in 2020 when the equipment was purchased. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this map indicates the growth of meat processing capability, I guess, for the state of Wyoming. We have seen very rapid growth, very intense interest in meat processing for the past 3 years. It's been one of our highest priorities. We've been running all over the place with the grant programs that we were running through CARES Act and trying to get a lot of new facilities online. And so, you know, the way that this is arranged in this map is there's little icons there that say USDA. 10 years ago, when we first were trying to expand meat processing in the state, we didn't have any USDA plants. And now we have 12 of those. And so in recent years, we've really focused as a department in encouraging folks to pursue USDA inspection because it provides them greater flexibility to do with their product what they want. If we inspect it at the state level, that product is confined to sale within the confines, the boundaries of the state of Wyoming. If it's a USDA inspected product, it's eligible for interstate shipping. I wish the restriction weren't that way. We have to achieve an equal to status to USDA. From a wholesomeness and quality standpoint, we have to make sure that that meat's just as safe and has all the protections that a USDA plant does. But we're not allowed to ship that across state boundaries. 10 years ago, when we didn't have any federally inspected plants, the hardship there was that they wouldn't send federal inspectors out for plants that process the limited number of livestock that were going through the smaller plants at the time. That has not been a challenge lately. I do think there's a potential that it will be again. We're already getting anecdotal reports that USDA is having to fly inspectors around the country from meat plant to meat plant on alternating days so that they can inspect the slaughter activities in one plant. And they can start processing, and then they have to jump to the next one so that everybody gets inspected. But they're having from what I understand, I don't have any data to back this up, but I have been told by my inspectors that it's becoming difficult again to get a federal mark of inspection on plants. And so we expect that there might be more demand for state inspection so that, these plants can at least continue to operate if they can't get inspection from USDA. I hope that's not the case, but that's what I'm hearing so far. So we got 12 of those plants. We've grown the custom exempt operations by 5. We've had a lot of ownership changes within the custom exempt operations as well. And then state inspection, we've actually moved a couple of plants from state inspection into federal inspection. So that was the goal with the money. I think it was successful. I think we still have not seen the full benefit of that investment, but I hope that we can get some more push, some more activity in this realm. So,
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What does it take to train a federal meat inspector to the quality that you guys need? Could the state of Wyoming do the federal meat inspection process themselves and come up with their own meat inspectors for the state of Wyoming, I guess is what I'm asking. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, there's certification classes for meat inspectors that are offered by USDA, and they're fairly intensive classes and exams that must be taken. And we send our state inspectors to the federal school because at the end of the day, it's the federal regulation that we have to take delegated authority for in order to make sure that our plants are eligible to operate. So our state inspectors go to the same schools that the federal inspectors do.
Representative
Okay.
Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director. So do we have any idea, like a per head increase? And I bet it'd be a little skewed, but year over year, since we've made this investment, we're probably not quite to capacity, but per head per year, or do we have that information yet? Year over where we started before this program?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, let me do a query on that data because I think we have it from, because I had given you some numbers about, I think maybe year before last for 2000, maybe 19, I think I had reported that we were in that 1,600 head range, across all of our state inspected facilities at the time. And what's been reported to me by Consumer Health Services Division, they expect that number has risen. We have processed more animals this year than we have in the past. They think that even within our state inspected process, even though we moved from state inspection to federal inspection, we still think that the total number processed under state inspection will have increased this year. So I have that general sense. That's the information that's been given to me so far, but I'm willing to dig out some stats for you if you're interested.
Yeah, well, Director, just my 2 cents, appreciate the work that, that your department's put in this. I know you administered that grant program during COVID, and I think it's certainly helped out. One of my county commissioners says, we get blamed for stuff we don't necessarily do, so might as well take credit for things that, maybe the private sector took the lead, but we certainly played a part. And so, yeah, I think this is a huge improvement. It was even, I'd say 3 years ago, there's only one really USDA plan that was even in the works. I mean, you said a 10-year time frame. I thought it was quite a bit shorter than that, right? So we've, 12 plants within a couple of years. I think that's a big deal. And we had a lot of discussion on this committee about stability of the supply chain and making sure that we aren't just dependent on these big, large corporations. Half of them are owned by foreign entities. So I think this is a huge step in the right direction, and certainly a lot of factors in the private sector that have contributed to this, but certainly the state has played a part as well, which I have no problem doing so long as we have other large meat packing plants being subsidized by foreign governments or owned outright by foreign governments. It's not a private sector area, and just want to make sure that's abundantly clear. Sometimes that comes up on the floor. So once again, good job, and we'll hear from the Business Council here in a little bit, but hopefully we can keep up the momentum here. Or Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd personally like to thank you guys for all the efforts you've been doing. It's amazing what they've been able to reach out and do and work so hard with all of us. We had some work in our area that was needed, and they were nothing but gracious and worked very hard with us to get things to work so that it was all legal. And my hat's off to you guys. You're doing a great job. Keep it up. Just real nice.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, you have my commitment that we have a lot of new faces that are entering into the meat processing business for the first time. There's a lot of interest in that, and with that comes an obligation for a lot of education because those regulations are complicated. And we do have people that participated in the grant program that get frustrated with us about the complexity of those regulations, and that has been a challenge for us in a couple different instances across the state. We'll continue to work through that. What I would tell this committee is that the goal of everybody who entered into this meat expansion program was to get their certification, get their license, and compete in business. And we want the same thing for them. We just have to make sure that we do the job correctly and maintain the integrity of that program, because I want to remind this committee that we have had, let's say, some friction with the USDA, Food Safety Inspection Service, particularly the Office of Enforcement Investigations and Audits. They're the ones that came out and did, I think, 17, they took a look at 17 different custom exempt meat plants last year. And that was a process that we went out and prepared our custom exempt operators for that audit, and no findings. So that was very important, but we need to maintain that because they really have their eyes on us. So I appreciate the support very much. I appreciate the understanding, and we'll keep moving forward and try the best we can.
Well, thanks, Director. I think that might have had something to do with the food freedom law or two that we passed, but so far, no findings. So say let them come. Anyways, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, Director, so along those lines, do we need, I guess, do you have current capacity to help those people along with those regulations, or do we need to work on some sort of a program, or do you think you're getting it done with what you have? Do we need a smoother system? How's that? Are we too soon to know? I guess there's a lot of, I guess, a steep learning curve, and then things should level out as fast as we've grown. But what's your thoughts there? Are we where we need to be, or is there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, no, I don't think we are where we need to be. We've learned some things in working through the meat processing expansion grant program and having people that are kind of new to the industry. And I think that we do need to take a refreshed look at how we're presenting this information and seeing if there's a clear way to articulate the regulations and where they come from. So a lot of these regulations obviously come from deep stacks of codes of federal regulation that are buried in different segments all over the place, and it's very difficult to understand as somebody who hasn't done this before. Is that a facility requirement for a custom exempt operation, or does that only apply to state inspected? Is that a facility requirement for USDA? What about software? What do you have to inspect for each of these different levels of inspection? It all gets very confusing. And then you have some different standards for people who own livestock and were responsible for the raising of that livestock, where they have this broad array of exemptions from the act altogether. So people get really confused in the difference between custom exempt processing and personal use exemptions and retail exemptions. Those are the three main exemptions, and those are the three topics that I think we've had a difficult time conveying to people that may be fairly new at this. So I do think we need to take a different look at that. I'm doing that right now because we have an operator that we're trying to get into the system. We have an applicant that is struggling, and I think we're talking past each other. And so we need to take a refreshed look at that. And my plan for that is that, first of all, I'd like to extend an opportunity to provide a third party, like an independent third party assessor in a mediation type setting, so that when we have these conversations, we can make sure that it's not adversarial. We don't want it to be that way. The other thing that we did in a case up in Powell was that we were wondering if we were having a language barrier, so we hired an interpreter, an English to Spanish translator, and we had a meeting with that group as well, and I was involved in that. You know, we just all got in the room together and we went through the issues one by one and tried to line them out. And then the third thing I think we can offer for people that are struggling a little bit or may not understand what we're trying to say is that we can provide them a technical contact at USDA within the Office of Enforcement and Investigations Audits, that group that decides whether or not you've cleared the bar to be a a certified facility, we can provide some names and contact information for those folks so that they can go straight to the source if they're not comfortable with either the way we're conveying that information or the information that we're stating just generally. So that's what I'd like to try first. But we do have some, it is clear to me that we have some work to do in the communication department when it comes to newer applicants. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, it looks like about a third of your staff are in the consumer health services, a very big portion of them, and you've got field inspectors all over the state. And you mentioned that most of them have been through the USDA training, the same schools. But these individuals are working remotely, and a lot of times they're the boots on the ground for your organization. I love technology. I'm so grateful that we have, during the pandemic, found that we can meet remotely without having to bring everyone to Cheyenne for routine meetings. Is this part of your mode of operations, that you do have periodic meetings with your staff so that they're all on the same page and not just going off in different directions where they're working so remotely?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I'd like to say yes to that, but for the past couple of years, that hasn't been the case. And so it's something that we need to refocus on. We've had some struggles in the travel budget department as of late, coming kind of into the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, we didn't have any all agency type of meetings, but we do meet face-to-face by division quite frequently.
Follow up? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, through the technology of Zoom, we don't have to actually meet face-to-face all that often, but to have, periodic meetings with our staff. And the advantage is that they're all pulling in the same direction. The questions can be brought up, and so that they all have the same answers. And that's what we're seeing sometimes out in the field, is different personnel have different answers. And we're not getting clear direction. And there's a little bit of confusion in the field because they're getting different answers. So I just wondering if we're getting the same training to all of our field inspectors so that they all are consistent and unified in their answers.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I think I know the situation in which you're referring. And I've taken a look at that I got a copy of a letter yesterday from an applicant, and talked to my manager of the Consumer Health Services Division about the correspondence that went back and forth, and I've reviewed that as well. And I think in that case, there's some confusion there, but the examples that were brought forward in that letter that I know all of you got, both of those claims by our inspectors are true. So there's some confusion there, I believe, about what is required to qualify for a personal use exemption and what is required to be licensed as a custom exempt processor. So that needs to be explained better. And I do think it's a communication problem, but I think in this instance, both of those statements by those inspectors were true at the same time. They appeared to our applicant to conflict, but in actuality, they don't conflict. There's a rational explanation for it. So I will get to that. And I have the staff right now going through that letter and preparing responses for each one of the items that there's confusion or disagreement about. That's how I'm going to take my first stab at it. But I understand what you're saying, and I do think we do need to make sure that we're consistent, because it's already confusing enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, Director, and I apologize for that, but could you explain to me in particular, or any of the other legislators, what the difference is or advantage of a custom exempt versus a regular license? Why do we have, 50%, well, 31 custom exempts versus 22 of federally or state inspected? What's the advantage of custom exempt versus a USDA or state inspection?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I'm glad you asked that question. This is part of the intricacies of the Federal Meat Inspection Act that are a little bit tricky. So custom exempt processing is to me kind of a misleading term, because it's neither custom processing nor is it exempt from very much. It's exempt from some provisions of the Federal Meat Inspection Act, like the requirement that there be an inspector in the facility every day. But in short, custom exempt processing is meant as a business that processes livestock for their owners and then returns that meat back to the rancher. And so it's for personal consumption, but that slaughter process and that processing process is done by somebody other than the rancher. So the rancher hires somebody to do this processing. They go pick up the packages of meat. I'm sure most of you in here have gone and got packages of beef that say not for sale on them. That was all done custom exempt. It's cheaper to do it that way because there isn't all of the requirements for documentation and inspection that are required in the next level up, which is state inspection, the one that you see on the map that has the buck and horse symbol. That is the middle step, I would say, or that's how I would equate it. And state inspected facilities can be done by state inspectors implementing the regulations of the Federal Meat Inspection Act, making sure that the program is equal to federal inspection, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same as. So some of the advantages of that are that the state inspected facility doesn't have to meet all of the facility requirements of a federally inspected plant, as long as they're equal to that. So if you can prove that you can provide the same level of sanitation in a building that doesn't have as wide a doors or may not have all the drains in it or whatever the case may be, it can be done a little less expensive. And if your outlet is all going to be within the state of Wyoming anyway, then it is advantageous for some because they know their inspector very well, and it's a familiarity process, and it goes smooth. So that's the middle one, is state inspection, and then the one that we've been pushing is a USDA inspected plant. Those are required to be plants that are built with a dedicated office for USDA personnel to come in. They have to have their own facilities for record keeping. They have to use USDA software. They have to be, that's the highest level of record keeping, documentation, and inspection in the meat processing world. But that meat can go anywhere. It's eligible for international trade. It's eligible to cross state lines and be sold. It can go anywhere. So that's the difference in the levels.
Do we have any grocery chains in Wyoming that have their own processing plants?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, we do. We're aware of several that operate under what we call so there's a few exemptions that provide you some latitude from all the requirements of the Federal Meat Inspection Act. We have a few grocery stores that still do some processing. Nobody that I know that does slaughter and processing.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just wanted to get some clarification, if I could. Going back on the weed question here. Is there any prohibitions that you're aware of with your office testing for law enforcement, for hemp products in particular?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, no.
I'm asking this because in judiciary, what a committee I serve on, we had issues come up in Sheridan in particular where people are selling hemp product, but it looked like bud. And law enforcement was claiming they believed that it had higher THC content, and they're claiming that they couldn't test it because it was prohibitive and they didn't know really where to send it that had a high enough, a good enough quality test to prove THC content down to 0.3%. So that's why I'm asking.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, we are capable of sampling those for THC concentrations. Be happy to do it.
Thank you very much, sir, for your question and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Miyamoto, I guess one of the questions I had, I'm aware of the letter that you received as well from my area. And I guess one of the questions I had, because I do think there's been some miscommunication, some things that have gone on, but I was wondering, you talked about the 5 different departments or levels that you have within your department. Somebody that is working on obtaining the exempt status, the custom exempt, how many of those departments, those 5 different parts of your department, is he dealing with? Is he dealing with multiple ones, or is he dealing with one in particular? Can you answer that, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, he would only be dealing with the Consumer Health Services Division, that it would all be self-contained in that division.
Okay, please continue, Director.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This gives you an idea about the number of inspections that we're doing. And because of all those plant build outs that we had, we anticipate that in 2022 we'll do more inspections than we have. We're on pace to exceed our average, I guess would be the way to say that. So that's all I really had on that slide. Next slide, please. Okay, natural resources and policy. This is the group that does a lot of comments on resource management plans, allotment management plans, anything that's going on with federal land management policy, BLM, Forest Service, waters of the United States type comments, anything that happens in the natural resources realm. This is the group that does the comments on behalf of the Department of Agriculture. So they work on a myriad of different issues. Most of them have to do with federal land planning, and that work is picking up as well. And so we've seen most of the federal employees are back in their offices now and starting to spin up again. And so that workload is increasing. We have some plans in place. Next slide, please. With some of our existing programs that we intend to pursue some leveraged funds to help out with the amount of data that we can collect on rangelands, for instance. There is a application by the National Association of State Departments of Ag, and we have a chapter in that application essentially that we would like to add some of that money into our budget so that we can contract with federal permittees, grazing permit holders to collect data to show their resource concerns. Mostly what we have there is the reason the program was started was to add information during the permit renewal process. Somebody had to apply to renew their grazing permit and didn't have enough data to indicate that it was viable for them to renew that permit. That was the design of this program, and we have lost some of the funding for it. So this is a plan that we have to try to rebuild that with a different set of funds. It used to come through the general fund, and there's still a little bit there, but we would like to bolster that account. That data has been valuable. It's been a weapon for some of our permittees that they can kind of fill their files with, rangeland health data that they can use to justify the renewal of their permits anyway. So That's some of the activity that we have in natural resources and policy. And then the other project that we have, next slide, please, is one that has to do with the infrastructure funds that are coming through the federal government right now. There's Good Neighbor Authority that I know this committee heard a little bit about through State Forestry yesterday and their partnerships with both Forest Service and BLM. We have Good Neighbor Authority agreements with Forest Service at this point in time, and we are working one with BLM. So we see that there's going to be some opportunities, we believe, through the Interior Department, through infrastructure, that we can do some work on restoration type projects and invasive species as well. And so we're working on those applications today too. The last one I have for you is technical services. Next slide, please. And I think all of you are fairly well aware of what technical services does. This is the part that I was talking about, feeds and fertilizers, and when we talk about hemp, that's in that realm as well. Nursery stock, fuels, weights, measures, that's all contained within technical services. And that all is going well. I think our inspections will be a little bit up this year than from where it typically is in the average year. But the one item in the technical services division that I wanted to bring your attention to is a question that was asked by Chairman Boner of me to bring you information regarding our predator program and how funding comes into the different aspects of the predator program. So I'd like to spend just a second on the last slide. Oops, I'm sorry, the last slide. One more. Maybe it's not there. Did everybody get this handout? I'm sorry. I thought we had tagged it on the end. We must not have. I apologize. So, as I said, Chairman Boner asked me to kind of show you how this program is funded and the origination of fees that come into the funding of the predator programs within the Department of Agriculture. So what you see here is two pie charts. The one on the left, called Special Projects and Research Grants, that one is a pot of funding that is used primarily over the years to do studies on the impact of predation on wildlife. And so we've done studies that had to do with raven impacts on sage grouse. We've done studies on the impact of coyotes on deer fawn survival. A lot of those have a management component to them as well, where we are removing predators as part of that project, but primarily it is to try to ascertain the impact of predation on wildlife. And so that's this pot of money. And as you can see, a lot of that money, most of it comes from the Game and Fish Commission. So what you see here are the totals for annual allocations. So this is 1 year. So every year, the Game and Fish Commission contributes $200,000 to that research pot. That goes out to the predator boards to do districts. It can also go to universities, institutions of higher learning, whoever applies for it. But typically it is collaborations between the Game and Fish Department and local predator boards is the most typical scenario there. And then 24% of that funding, $65,900, comes from the general fund. And then there also is landowner coupon contributions. So that's a voluntary contribution by landowners when they get their receipt from the Game and Fish. They can designate which county predator board they'd like that funding to go to. And this is the way that it comes back into the projects. So that's on the research side of the ledger. And when you think of the predator control programs of the Department of Ag, typically you're thinking about this pie chart on the right. This is the Animal Damage Management Board predator control grants. And the source of those funds are mainly twofold. There's some other voluntary contributions that are small and sporadic in size from individual landowners that want to do individual work from time to time, but generally speaking, you have a 70-30 split in the way that that total allocation pool gets funded. 70% of it is from the general fund, and then 30% of that comes from brand inspection fees, predator fees that are part of your brand inspection. So the way that works is in those counties that charge $1 a head for predator fees at brand inspection time, Livestock Board collects those fees, send them to the state treasurer, and then those fees are designated back to individual counties wherever those livestock were sold. That goes into the coffers of the predator board where the livestock changed ownership. And so that's a contribution that is voluntary in nature as well, because as a payer of predator fees, as a rancher, you can request a refund and get that. It's not common. So that's a contribution that comes directly from livestock producers across the state, and then it's leveraged with our program. So that's the way that works. I hope that gives you what you needed.
All right, absolutely, Director. And maybe some of the committee will recall we had a bill about 2 or 3 years ago dealing with the fees that hunters would pay during the application process. And the idea was that the current optional program wasn't visible. And so is that on the left-hand pie chart? Is that general fund? Is that the fees from the hunting public they're voluntarily giving, or is that where are those fees coming and going? I guess.
Mr. Chairman, those fees have not surpassed the expense. As I understand it, that's all held within the Game and Fish Department, but as I understand it, that program hasn't paid for itself in a number of years. Mm-hmm. So it would come back in the form of contributions through the Game and Fish Department if it were profitable.
Okay. All right, so we got updated numbers from Game and Fish since January of 21. It's about 61,000 in donations, which is better than the non-existent donations that used to. I mean, they basically, it was like $1,000 or $2,000 a year. But you compare it to, say, the predator fees paid by the ranching side of the equation, it's 1.2 million. I still argue that they're not really comparable, and I still argue that the hunting public is benefiting from these services as much as the ag industry. And so just want to give the committee an update there. I'm not sure if we're going to ask for a bill draft to say institute a mandatory fee for the hunting public like many other states have. But I think it's important that this committee understands what those numbers are. Because the story that we heard is we need to give it time to work, the increased visibility of the voluntary stamp. And I would argue we need to set some goals here, and what's an appropriate amount that our hunters pay for predator control versus the ranchers, and maybe it's not the exact same amount, but I think we need to have that discussion. Maybe not in this committee, maybe not right now, but in general in the legislature, I think we need to have that discussion. When you have one industry contributing the vast majority of the funds, as far as what's raised outside the general funds, I think that becomes a concern. And I think we've been very patient, frankly, in giving hunting public every opportunity to step up to the plate voluntarily, but we might have to have a different discussion now. So any questions or comments on that, committee? Oh, go ahead, Representative Western.
Well, you talk about hunting and access, so I got to chime in. No, Mr. Chairman, I think your comments are spot on. I mean, the reality is that, yes, EDMB is designed to benefit ag and keep those predators at bay, but wildlife absolutely benefits from that as well. I mean, certainly in my country, in the Powder River Basin, can't tell you how many carcasses I've seen that are being picked clean by coyotes, taken down by coyotes. So I absolutely think that hunters have they have a dog in this fight, and I think increasing that contribution, maybe even from a mandatory perspective, is in order, at least having that discussion. So I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I want to back up just a little bit to your technical services and ask you a question about the apiaries. And I got to be careful how I word this question so I don't self-incriminate. Do the hobbyists need to register their hives with the Department of Agriculture?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I'll send you the rules on, there's cutoffs. So maybe.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's okay to get on weed and pest a little bit here. I've got a question. Representative Fortner asked me a question I couldn't answer. I think we've been through it and you might be able to help us. He has a friend with a prairie dog problem that's caused, he controls his, the guy across got a pile of them. Is there any recourse a person would have for that? It might be the same with noxious weeds too. You've got people, their Canada thistles blowing onto their place from people that don't control it. Do we have any recourse to do something about the neighbors' prairie dogs? And it could become a problem because not far south of here, we've had land purchased to relocate prairie dogs from the Front Range. And I don't want to see that happen in Wyoming, but curious what we can do.
Okay, so looks like we'll move on to weed and pests and maybe answer that question and then we'll, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll double check. Well, so any more questions for the Department of Agriculture or for Director Miyamoto, I should say? Or we move on to the weed and pest report?
Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries, that's okay. All right, just double checking. All right, so we're good to go. Mr. Franklin, you have one question and yeah, feel free to provide your update that maybe you can incorporate and answer.
Mr. Chairman, Slade Franklin, Weed and Pest Coordinator with the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and I am here to talk about our biannual report, but I certainly will help answer some questions presented from Representative Eklund concerning prairie dog and enforcement of our statutes. So I don't know if there's a preference. Maybe should I answer that now first, Mr. Chairman, or should we go to the report first?
Whatever you'd like to do.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's actually talk a little bit about that first, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, since it was brought up. So we do have enforcement regulation with the weed and pest law that is available for issues when it comes to weed or pest issues that, you know, are concerning. Typically, we have those kind of complaints with weeds or prairie dogs. That's typically when they come up. The process really is, if a landowner has a complaint, they can take it to the Weed and Pest Board, and the board has a process where they would go through and do the inspection to determine what that infestation and what the concern is. As this committee may remember, in I think it was 2020 session, one of the things that this committee worked on was revamping the statutes based on how a Weed and Pest Board can go in and do the inspection for a infestation. They did not deal with the actual treatments of that infestation. There was concerns with public or private land rights that were brought up, I think, in that discussion. So the legislation that you guys approved was specifically about how they could go on and do that inspection or investigation of the problem. Old law said that they had to use lawful entry procedures, and the legislature worked out what those lawful entry procedures were for inspection. That being said, the statutes have historically had clauses in there that the Weed and Pest Board can create a management program for that land if they feel that it is infested and going to interfere with neighboring lands. They can create a management plan for that landowner. And then they also have fining abilities. If that landowner does not comply or does not assist with that problem, there are fines that the district board can go after. It's $50 a day up to $2,500 for a year. And that's been around for, I would say those maybe have even been in the 73 law. So those haven't changed or didn't change in that 2020 bill that your committee worked on. So there is a regulatory enforcement statute or standards that they can use. Typically, if I have a landowner call me and complain about whether it's prairie dogs or weeds on their neighbor's place, I tell them to write a letter, send it to that district board, attend that district board meeting and discuss it with them. Typically, those situations don't go very far because we have a cost share program in place that the landowners can utilize to take care of the issue. So we have a resolution for that landowner to go out there and treat at a lower cost, and that's available to any of the landowners, in those districts. So yeah, it's 11.5.109 is the enforcement standards. There's, I would say, not many cases where we've gone full all the way through, none in my, I guess, 10 or 20 years of doing this, where we've actually gotten to the point where fines have been collected. But it is a process that can be utilized. All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the reason I am here is originally was to talk about what we have as our legislative report to you, our biannual report. And I would refer you to a new copy that was handed out on the desk of the report. It seems like when I formatted the copy and sent it to LSO, some of the information was deleted. So the copy that was set on your desk right before you came back after lunch, I would refer to that one as we go through the report. But just to kind of go back historically why we're doing this report, it's the first time we've ever done this report, so the council is open to any suggestions or recommendations or things that you'd like to see changed in it. It was our first crack at it, and we just wanted to have full disclosure on it. But the report really goes back to 2020 when the governor had his invasive species initiative and report that came out. This was a report that even some on the committee worked on, and ideas and concepts that we needed to work on with invasive species in the state of Wyoming. A lot of emphasis on the invasive annual grass issues, including cheatgrass, Medusa head, and bent Ncda that we have in our state. Within that governor's report, there was some final recommendations that were made, and your committee and the legislature took those recommendations and infused them into statute for responsibilities of the council. And one of those responsibilities that was infused into that statute was us providing a biannual report on the status of current funding models, existing or new funding challenges, and opportunities to improve funding for designated and declared invasive plant species. Now, you'll see in this report, we went a little above and beyond that. We actually did all-inclusive, not just plants, but we did pests and grasshoppers. You're getting some mosquito program information, and of course, prairie dog information is in there too. So certainly, if you guys want to keep it in the future to only plant species, we're willing to do that. But we thought maybe to help paint the picture of what the council and districts do, it'd be better just to give you a whole financial overview of the council. So that was kind of our mentality going in this. We did, I don't know if it's the best, Mr. Chairman, to go through section by section what we did, or just a general overview, if you have a feeling what's best for the committee.
We can start with the general overview and let the committee ask questions and
Sure.
see how deep we want to go here.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, one thing I did do is kind of a personal vendetta, maybe is a better word to put it, is I do like to point out is that we have 23 weed and pest boards in the state, one basically in each county, and they are more or less managed by volunteer boards. And that's members of the public who are not getting paid to do this. They have to be at a meeting basically once a month to administer the program. They have statutes, like we talked about, the enforcement statutes that they're responsible for. So I thought it was important to call out some of these volunteer board members, and that's why I indicated down there on the bottom of that first page some of the service years that they have provided. I think it's a unique thing about small communities is having people volunteer on things like that, and they should be commended. With that, though, we do go into the financial information. That second page, that is probably the most important part, I'd say, for the report and for the committee. That top part is what our existing or new funding challenges and opportunities to improve funding are. So I did put this report together with members of the council, and these are just the highlighted areas that we feel in the coming years we should be working on as a council, whether it's finances, grants, or, there's some few in there that aren't financially related for that matter. So just an indication of some of those things that we see or we think that need to occur to move our programs forward. With that, I did provide information about what we have for mill levies for all the districts in the state. There's 2 mill levies that are available to weed and pest districts. Some use a portion of the first mill, some use their full 2 mill levies. So it's a little bit across the board, and you can see what each district is is taking for mill levies and how much that generates, and that's their base funding that they use for the programs in their districts. And I guess I should clarify too, that second mill is associated with the special management program. And that's another program that you guys worked on in the last couple of years in terms of updating the statutes related to that special management program. And then we also did a survey with all the districts to determine where fundings were coming from all federal and state agencies or other grants, just to get a comprehensive view of what funding might not be coming from the state or from their mill levies. And so you can see we came up based on the survey at the districts where a lot of the funding's coming from the individual agencies as a whole for the state. And then that next page with that bar graph, you can see how much each of those individual districts are getting from the agencies. So you can see what those funds are. Typically, those are contract or cooperative agreement funds with the federal agencies to help them with weed management on their federal lands. Or sometimes that funding can be utilized outside of their federal lands, but mostly it's just almost like a contractual work with them. And then we did include all the information concerning our grant programs that are run through the state. We have a small pot of money called the Special Management Program funds, and then the pesticide registration funds that we had worked with your committee on several years ago to increase. And you can see that we've been allocating those funds out to various programs throughout the state. It can be weed or pest issues. The majority of it has been on, I'd say, invasive annual grasses and weeds, but we have some programs that work on prairie dogs also that the funds have been utilized for. And in a couple extreme cases, we've even used them for grasshopper control. And I'll explain that a little better when we get farther into the report with the grasshoppers. And then just individually, after you get through that, I guess I should back up with these colored chart here. You can actually see where a lot of the matching funds are coming from for some of the grant programs. So these programs are not just being funded from the grants that the state is providing. We have a lot of partners, whether it's private landowners, federal, state agencies who are also putting money into those programs. And then just individually with the grant programs, you can see what was requested, what was funded, and then again, because there was a discussion in the statute about funding shortages, that's what the red numbers are there, is that's the amount of the grant requests that we did not fund, and that's for various reasons. That may be for, they came in with a grant request for 3 years, and we felt it made sense to fund it for 1 year. It may be because there was shortage of funds that we felt for that program, but or there might have been corrections on their grant application that could have been an indication why that they didn't fully fund that one. And so you have the 2021, 2022 of the SAC grants, and you can see all the discrepancies or differences in the funding there. And then there was a few grants that we funded that weren't specific to controlling weeds or pests, and those are the ones that are listed on that next page. We do a biocontrol consortium program, state of Wyoming, where we actually fund for research of finding new biocontrol agents that work on a lot of the invasive weeds in our state. We also do a mapping program statewide where we help coordinate getting the mapping information for the districts together so we can get a better statewide picture of our weed and pest issues and help with planning issues on landscape scale projects. And then we do education and outreach. And I think that's one of the big discussions we talked about with your committee is we lack on outreach, especially with recreationalists and the impact they have. And so that's one of the places we're really trying to beef up our education and outreach is the non-ag communities who may not have the economic impact from the invasive weeds.
And so just real brief there, I mean, that was one of the objectives of that bill from a couple years ago, making sure the state is, providing that support role, whether it be information or the education campaign. And so I guess I was wondering about the progress. It looks like you may have done some of the University of Wyoming to do some sort of monitoring network to see if there's any emerging threats or something we should, take a look at that may not be identified in one county or the other, and provide that sort of, I guess, clearinghouse of information, if you will, that will assist the local boards in making decisions. And you just spent a little bit of time on that and how that's progressing. I thought that was kind of a relatively new concept that we try to flesh out, just seeing, checking how that's going.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and that fits into what they call the University of Wyoming's Imagine program. The reason that invasive grass treatment monitoring network, that last one there came up was, we are doing a lot of implementation of projects for one in the state for invasive annual grasses, but we really do need to do monitoring on what that long-term success for those projects are, short-term and long-term, but then get a better understanding of what that means on a statewide level. And certainly that's a service the university is providing through this grant and other funding that they've gotten for it. So they can help the districts with doing that long-term monitoring, and we can hopefully paint a better picture, especially with the invasive annual grasses is what's happening. So.
And 4.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering, and I apologize, but I know, I recall that at one point we were talking about weed and pest control on the state trust lands, but I don't remember if we resolved that issue or if that is an issue that still remains. And I hadn't thought about that. We probably should have talked about that yesterday when we had the state trust director here, but can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Warp, so you guys, or the legislature passed a bill where the Department of Ag would have responsibility over the funds for Office of State Lands, administered lands. That bill was passed this last session. There was funding associated with that. However, we haven't implemented that and won't until the next spring. So I would expect in the next biennial report, you will see a report out on how those funds are used and where they went. At this point, we just had some preliminary conversations about what the formula will be on how we'll allocate those funds, but we're certainly planning to sit down with the Office of State Lands in the near future so we can have their input of what they've done in the past and ideas and formulate a plan so we're ready for the spring. All right. Mr. Chairman, just the next page, we're talking about the Wyoming Department of Transportation Noxious Weed Program. The weed and pest districts through the Department of Ag contract to do the weed control along the right-of-ways for the highways and interstates. This just gives you a historical overview of that funding. Again, we use a committee that's created in statute called the State Allocations Committee. They actually allocate all our grants. They also allocate these funds. And we break it up to the 23 districts, and they utilize those funds for controlling the right-of-ways. Corridors with the railroads and our highways are still one of the primary vectors that we see for weed movement in the state and in the region. And I like to throw the state south of us under the bus all the time with this, but this is a great time of year if you drive down south to see what weed trouble could be along a highway or interstate. It's just significantly a problem, and it's moving farther north as we go. So.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just a quick question about weeds, noxious weeds.
Yeah.
Is it your opinion, can you stop them with this mitigation, or will they continue to encroach because of the wind and such vectors of travel? Could you, I'm just confused about what we really can do.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, how much time do we have today? That's a philosophical question. No, so there's different ways you can approach that. We are not going to eradicate cheatgrass from the state of Wyoming. That is not going to happen. It's fairly widespread throughout the state, but we can identify areas where it's a high quality habitat, whether it's for sage grouse or high quality ag use, and we can go in there and we can manage it so it's part of that system, if not take it out in those locations. But we're not going to eradicate from the state. But then we have situations like yellow star thistle, which I think it's like 1.2 million acres of it in California, and it's a highly invasive knapweed that we don't have in the state of Wyoming. But when we find, we've found it 4 or 5 different times, we can go in there and we can eradicate it and take it out of the system. We can also backtrack how it got into that system. One of the cases was in county on the west side of the state. We were able to track it back to house construction equipment that came in from Utah. And then we can do outreach and education with them. So it really comes down to how you want to use the land that you're on, whether it's agriculture, wildlife, or not. But you can mitigate weeds into certain situations, but weed management as a whole, noxious weed management, especially a lot of these weeds that are already in the state, it's going to be a long-term commitment.
Okay, please proceed. Go ahead.
So then, Mr. Chairman, next page, we do get federal grants to the Department of Ag for invasive weed control. The grant specifically we get is the State and Private Forester Grant from Forest Service. I wouldn't say it's a very significant grant. This year we're getting $75,000, although they are talking about utilizing it as a mechanism to move infrastructure money associated with invasive species to the states. So we may see an increase in that amount in the next couple of years. And then finally, again, I think the statute's reference was plant, but we did include information on the Emergency Insect Management Grant Program. That's a program we administer at the Department of Ag also. Why that's important is especially for grasshoppers and municipal mosquito control programs. Typically, we try to fund those programs out of this pot of money. And you can see the grant programs that were not funded, or the amounts that were not funded on that program. The reason I think that's really important is getting back to the pages past that. We included our West Nile virus risk map. That's a map that shows the potential for a West Nile virus outbreak in the state of Wyoming based on environmental conditions that are suitable for the Culex tarsalis mosquito. And I think COVID kind of blanketed the concerns with West Nile virus, but it still is very prevalent in our state. And then finally, we did include grasshopper risk maps because that's something we watch significantly in our state. We were expecting some major concerns last year. We had some, but they weren't nearly as severe as we were expecting. This year, it seems a little better, but states around us, including Montana and Nebraska, are going to have some outbreaks. So we just want to bring that to your attention that we may not have the indications of an outbreak for this year, but certainly states around us could, and that can influence what our problems are for our state. So that's as quickly as I can go through that report. And I would say, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, last page, just to help you understand how we're monitoring this with the Wyoming Weed and Pest Council. We do have a guiding principles committee. We've setting up short-term, long-term goals based on the statutory requirements you guys gave the council. So we monitor both short-term accomplishments, long-term, and what we need to work on. So a lot of those ideas that we said we needed to work on that second page came from that committee. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you see a need to be tracking some of these hay shipments that come in loaded with weeds of all kinds? And if so, what do you propose for a process to sort of try to curb that back or eliminate it? I know there's a lot of weeds that come in, different varieties come in with different loads from different parts of the country. Just like you say, if some come out of California, we'd end up with their weeds as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, weed-free forage is a program that we could expand on and I think would benefit the state from weed movement. We do have 3 counties that have quarantines in their counties for weed movement or crop movement that could be weed infested. They have to get it certified as being weed-free before that product is moved off of their places. And that's Park County, Bighorn County, and Teton. And their quarantines are a little different for each of them. And then you also have the Forest Service that has a quarantine on hay that is brought up into the National Forest. It has to be certified weed-free forage. Other than that, there's difficulty even enforcing that on those county levels. For instance, Teton County has tried to work with the Highway Patrol in terms of stopping hay shipments that are coming through that aren't certified. And obviously, Highway Patrol has a lot bigger concerns in stopping every hay shipment that comes through Teton County. But you'll see it. I can give great examples of, I think it was 2013 drought, going up North Dakota, watching them harvest cattails and Canada thistle, baling it up, and then all that hay was moving down to Texas during the drought in Texas. And it moves right through our state. So I'm still trying to look for solutions there. I'm trying to look for ways we can improve the amount of growers who grow weed-free forage in the state, and that may be the best way to do it, is somehow incentivize, if not, find markets for them and do it that way instead of trying to do it through regulatory manners. But yeah, definitely weed-free forage is a primary program that we should be targeting.
Okay, any further questions, committee? Okay, sounds good. So it looks like we'll open up to public comment. I believe we have 2 folks online. So we'll start there, then we'll go to in person. It looks like we have Mr. Williams, is that correct? So please introduce yourself and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can, please proceed.
Okay. My name is Jacob Williams. I'm the owner of Fraughton Meat Company in Uena County. I'm the one that was previously referred to sending out the letter regarding some difficulties I've been having with my application process as a custom exempt processor. I wanted to speak to the committee today about some of those problems. Some of those have already slightly been addressed by Director Miyamoto. First, I wanted to say that I appreciate Director Miyamoto's comments regarding miscommunication and finding ways around those. I look forward to finding ways past those difficulties, because I know that it's been pretty confusing for me on my end as far as what's required of me. Some of the issues I've been having is what was already spoken about earlier, as far as the distinction between a custom exempt meat processor and the other tier, state inspected and USDA inspected. Most of what I've been getting from the Consumer Health Services and the Department of Agriculture is the idea that the only difference between a custom processor and a state or USDA inspected one is that there's no on-site inspector that's there every day during slaughter and processing operations. I don't understand. I guess I'm part of the miscommunication, I suppose, is coming from when I read the CFR that makes the distinction between these 2 types of operations. It exempts a custom processor from all the other areas of the Meat Inspection Act, and it lists out specifically which ones would still apply to that custom processor. Those requirements are spelled out. They're very specific as to which ones would apply to him. So outside of not having an on-site inspector at the custom shop, there's a very limited amount of regulation taken out of the rest of Title IX of the CFR that handles things like general sanitation, record keeping, humane slaughtering, those types of things. It's generally pretty easy to understand, and it does leave a pretty wide area open for custom processors that are easier to accomplish than trying to get into a state inspected or USDA inspected facility. If the equal to status meant that a custom processor had to meet all of the same requirements as a state or a USDA inspected facility, then there would be no benefit to opening as a custom processor. These types of exemptions, which is the title of the CFR 303.1, allow for smaller businesses to get into the industry with less startup capital and being able to make other smaller facilities work for their purposes. So as far as large amounts of federal code that's hard to understand, the way I read it, it's not difficult to understand, and it does allow for a pretty big variation as far as these facilities are put together. Compared to Wyoming too, a lot of my experience in the meat industry comes from Utah. That's where I went to school, and that's where I've worked in several different facilities down there. Utah is currently taking advantage of these exemptions. The custom shops down there they don't have the same facilities as an inspected plant would. They don't have the same equipment, and they operate in a different way than these other facilities. In that state, it's relatively easy to start a custom processing operation, and that state is currently maintaining their equal to status with the federal government. The equal to status means that a custom processor would be held to the same standard that the federal government would hold that same processor to according to their standards. It doesn't mean that a custom processor should be held to the same standards as a fully inspected facility. Aside from confusion about which federal regulations would apply and how to maintain the equal to status, Director Miyamoto mentioned that there was some conflicting statements that I received during my application process. I assume he's talking about the slaughtering process that I was trying to get started. I was originally told, so when I had my first consultation for my shop prior to me starting the application process, I explained to the CHS inspector that I intended to do mobile slaughter operation. This type of operations common in Utah. It's common in a lot of other states. It's basically a situation where a custom processor will have an enclosed box truck or trailer, and they'll go out to the animal owner's property where the animal would be slaughtered, including bleeding, skinning, and evisceration. It would then be quartered and put on a rail system inside of the truck or trailer so that it could be transported back to the custom processor's shop for further processing. This type of operation is very common. It happens all across the country for custom operations. I explained that my intention was to utilize that type of an operation during my first consultation with CHS. I was told at that time that there was no licensing requirements, there was no inspection requirements, and that this type of operation was fully allowable within the state of Wyoming. So I built most of my business plans on that model, that I was going to either run a similar truck, an operation either by me, or I would contract it out to an operation that just does mobile slaughtering. A little bit later in the process, I was told by another CHS employee that a license was in fact required for this type of operation. It was explained that it wasn't a specific license to mobile slaughter, but that I had to license the mobile operation the same as I would any stationary facility. The other issue with that is that it was added during that time that my mobile slaughter operation couldn't skin the animal in the field. So the animal would have to be stunned, bled, and eviscerated in the field, and then brought back whole and unskinned to my facility, where it could be skinned in an official skinning room. It confused me a lot when I first heard that. My experience in slaughter operations in both custom and in USDA inspected facilities, skinning the animal has always been integral to evisceration. I've never seen it happen one without the other. There are certain processes in the evisceration operation that have to happen that I don't see any sanitary way to do that without skinning the animal. There's things like bunging the animal, the sternum has to be split, udders and types and other specified risk materials have to be removed along with the skin before the rest of the entrails can be removed from the animal. That I think that was the conflicting answers that was brought up earlier. I've looked at everything that I possibly can. I've looked through codes of federal regulation. I've tried to find some reference to the type of process that CHS is requiring that I do, and I can't find any reference. It doesn't appear to be an industry standard, and it doesn't appear to even be mentioned in any kind of regulatory reference that I can find. During my search, I was able, the only thing that mentioned it was a federal directive put out by the Food Safety Inspection Service of the federal government. They have a directive that clearly says that they don't recommend evisceration processes to happen without skinning. So at this point, I was left pretty confused because I was being mandated by the Consumer Health Services to do a process that to me appeared unsanitary and appeared to be in conflict with even federal directive. I think this is a case where it's a good example of one of the issues that I'm having, in which it's not even a difference of opinion on interpretation of regulation. It's simply a rule that I can't find any backing to, or in regulation or industry standards. My problems with this process, in an attempt to figure them out and find a way forward, I spoke with members of CHS, and I asked them if they could lead me towards any type of reference material to help me better understand a process that maybe I didn't know about. If this was a requirement, then I was happy to try and learn what that process could be so that I could do this in a sanitary manner. They weren't able to provide me with anything, and they told me to basically to YouTube it. I was told that videos of the process could be found on the internet. I have searched the internet. I can't find anybody nationwide that's doing this type of process. I called around to a couple of different shops within the state of Wyoming, hoping to gain some insight from those people. Obviously, I'm in competition with these other shops, and they're not highly motivated to talk to me about their processes. But I did speak on the phone with one shop that was doing a mobile slaughter operation. The owner of that shop told me that he was in fact eviscerating the carcasses without skinning them. And he advised me that the only reason he was doing this was because of the CHS requirement. And he described the process to me as absolute insanity. So I think this is a good example of what I've been running into trying to obtain my license for custom processing. Is this isn't even an interpretation of regulation differing from one person to the next. This is a requirement that doesn't have any basis at all. It's been incredibly frustrating to try and figure out what my next steps forward are in order to be in compliance with the department when I'm not able to look up where these rules are coming from. Some of the other issues that I've been having with regards to requirements that I've been told apply to my operation is that when I ask for the rule regarding the requirement, I was in law enforcement for a long time. So if I can have the law or the regulation, I'm pretty well versed in interpreting those and following those rules. So several of the times that I've asked for that, I've been given a document that is the USDA, Ncda, and CS facility guidelines for meat processing plants. This document's been given to me as a basis for a lot of the requirements that I've been directed that I have to follow. It's a joint effort, basically. This document was produced by a joint effort between the USDA and the state of North Carolina, and it was published in the Federal Register back in 1997. It's a general guideline for entities that are looking into building a new meat processing plant. It's not a regulation. It's not been adopted by the state of Wyoming. And as far as I know, it hasn't been adopted by the federal government even in any capacity. It's been published in the Federal Register, but it's not actually a CFR or a direct requirement. A lot of the issues, a lot of the suggestions in this document are directed towards fully inspected plants. It talks about things like considering the prevailing wind when positioning your building, things like that I and other small custom operators simply can't do. We're generally operating or converting out of existing facilities and that type of thing. The other issue that I've been having outside of that has been just kind of the general attitude that I've been working with at CHS. When I first started receiving the conflicting answers regarding mobile slaughter and other issues with getting my license, I started asking for regulatory citations to try and figure out, well, if I could just go to the original rule, then I would be able to comply with that rule. And that way I wouldn't have to rely on different answers from different people within the department. Once I started doing that, the tone of my interactions with CHS employees changed to adversarial. Anytime I asked a question, it was basically regarded as a challenge. And that's made it extremely difficult for me to work with them in order to find a way forward. When I first submitted my first application to get the license for custom exempt, that license was sent back to me with a denial letter that listed, I think 22 things that the department needed to know more about or questions that they asked in order to move forward trying to get my shop licensed. The vast majority of these issues were questions that were already explained on my application. Silly things like, does your bathroom have a self-closing door? My bathroom does have a self-closing door. There's a spot on the application for me to indicate that my bathroom has a self-closing door. And I went back and double checked that it didn't. I had filled it out completely and that information was there. Each time these denial letters come back from my application, it can take up to 2 weeks, maybe a month before I can resubmit and then have the department review that response letter and then get back to me. And when you're dealing with something like this, where I already told them the information that they're asking me to retell them, I'm spending expenses at my shop for a whole nother month, including mortgages and utilities and that type of thing, when basically the application wasn't read. It was denied without an actual review. I was speaking with a CHS employee about that issue. He confirmed to me verbally that they stamped my application with a denial without reviewing it. He admitted that they hadn't read the SOPs or the other documents included in that application. I don't know how to work around issues like that, which is why I'm here today to address the problems that I'm having. I know there's a lot of concern about the federal government and maintaining equal to status. I've looked a little bit into our surrounding neighbor states to see how they've been doing things. I know in Utah, the custom shops are operating with far less regulatory concerns compared to ones here in Wyoming, and they're maintaining an equal to status. One good example that I was able to find is comparing the application process in Wyoming to other states that are in our region. Utah's application for custom exempt operations is 4 pages long. Colorado's application is 1 page long, and South Dakota has 1 page as well. Wyoming requires 27 pages of application. And this doesn't include written SOPs, proposed chemical lists, drawn floor plans, pictures of equipment, spec sheets of equipment and building materials, letters of guarantee, and written approval from other state agencies like the, excuse me, the Fire Marshal, the Department of Environmental Quality, and the State Engineer's Office. Basically, these custom shops are traditionally used by smaller mom and pop type operations. They don't have a lot of startup capital, and they're basically getting their foot in the door of the industry by opening these smaller shops. These smaller shops also facilitate services to the community that they
Mr.
wouldn't be able to get.
Hey, Ms. Run, I appreciate your testimony. Just to let you know, we do have other members of the public that want to testify. So we believe that you're, speaking for my part, I believe that you're doing your best to, get this, get this approval, and that, if you could maybe summarize the concerns, you don't have to justify it with supporting information necessarily. I think you've established that you're having trouble with getting this permit. Other states do it differently. You're receiving conflicting information from different state employees and CHS. Are there any other concerns that you have in terms of your experience with this process?
I think that I guess I'm sorry for taking your time, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I can meet with members of the committee or Mr. Chairman outside of this venue and explain further if need be. Mostly, I'm here today to ask for any help that I can, any help that I might receive. I think that the process is stunting the smaller business owner in this state, and I think it's something that should be addressed by the legislature. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I do appreciate your testimony. We're just trying to make sure I understand the concerns. Hopefully I got them all. Like I said, the differences that you get in terms of the standards, you can't find any concrete or consistent standard. Other states do it differently. And so I appreciate that. And we'll have some answers from the director here. So that's part of this process is, hearing experiences like yours, somebody who's trying to do the right thing, trying to help us out, and responding to a real need as a rancher, within our industry and within our communities as well. So I do appreciate your perspective. We want to, get by with the least amount of regulation as possible, absolutely. And I do appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I'm interested in learning about the differences between, the way Wyoming does it and say Utah does it, what the reasons are for that. I know, for example, just, speculating here, but we have put a bit of a target on our backs with some of our food freedom laws. The USDA does not appreciate that, so they're really looking quite closely at custom exempt plants. So that may be a difference between Wyoming and Utah, for example. But I'll leave it to the director to respond to those concerns. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, Director, but certainly this is not what I think we want, certainly not the outcomes that we want when folks are trying to do the right thing, right? And certainly understand that it's a highly regulated industry, but hopefully we can help folks along who are experiencing difficulty in attaining these custom exempt status. So Director, please continue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that, the information brought today is iterated in the letter as well, and we're committed to going through those one by one and showing the authorities where they come from and why, and providing those citations in whatever format we need to. And I'd be willing to sit down with Mr. Williams as well and have that conversation. I just got the letter yesterday. I haven't been all the way through it, but I know that our CHS lead has been in contact with his counterpart in Utah already, evaluating, what are those differences and why, and that type of thing. So we are committed to helping people through this process, and we'll do that.
Well, Director, do your CHS personnel have a checklist that they use, a standardized checklist when they go through, especially a new plant? And is that available to the general public? Just a little bit more I guess I'm interested in learning about the consistency among personnel and providing a unified message. And how useful is that checklist if we're getting different answers from different personnel?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, we do have one. And the reason that our application is much longer than our surrounding states are is partially due to that. We include our plan review packet as part of the application so that people don't start building before the plan is approved. Because we don't want anybody to build anything that they then have to go back and tear out. And so part of that is the checklist. We can provide it.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just, I guess I look forward to seeing what you come up with during the review process of this application. Obviously, I would think that if an applicant went ahead and put something in after you said, well, don't put that in, or, you know, self-closing doors, I'll give an example, rather easy to correct. I mean, I don't know, sometimes I think in the regulation world, we get sometimes these little tiny things which really are irrelevant to them correcting them later on, get bogged down the process. I don't know. I've dealt a lot with planning and zoning folks, and it sounds an awful lot like that. Regulations that you have to comply with, and I think it's really hard for the individual to understand federal regs, even though we're talking to a ex-law enforcement person who probably has a better understanding than most. But the drafting a CFR for federal regulations, I don't know if that's required for these regs to become in effect. You know, I don't know. It's not my field, but I think we have to develop a process for our public to understand. That's simple and easy, and you folks that have all the knowledge are the best place to do that at. And so make the process streamlined as best you can. I realize you're not talking to an engineer here, but I think we gotta, you know, our all charge is to work with the public and try to figure out how to crack that nut and convey the information to them in a clean and concise way that they can understand. So I look forward to seeing what comes about from this situation. And I guess I'll save the rest of my comments for later. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Representative Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Miyamoto, I would also like a copy of the checklist sent to me if you don't mind. I don't know, I guess you could just send it to the whole committee, but I know I would like a copy if nobody else does. Thank you.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I appreciate that your department has grown through tremendous growth over the last couple of years as we've tried to, as the governor has phrased it, shorten the food chain. And meat processing is one of those areas that we've tried to focus on in this committee for the past couple of years and put a lot of grant money and other resources out there to develop this food processing, meat processing industry. You know, we've been doing it through the financing and fiscal, but maybe what we need to concentrate on for a little while is looking at our rules and regulations to make it a little bit more clarity and maybe a little easier for these small shops to be able to come into fruition and be successful to bring that niche into the individual community. So I look forward to working with your department, Director, and you know, as a member of this committee, that might be something we focus on a little bit is let's look at the rules and see if we can make it a little easier for our constituents to be able to get into this industry without growing government and making government more difficult to work with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miyamoto, I think this problem is common throughout the U.S. The USDA regulations on this are a pretty big barrier to entry. Would your department be committed to, say, putting out a one booklet guide with these regulations and simple explanations of the different ranks of meat inspection, or maybe there's something out there already, but I think this is, it's going on throughout the country, is the entire country is trying to shorten the food chain when we look at problems we had with COVID and empty grocery stores. If there isn't already a one-stop shop guide where somebody that wants to lay their own money out and make these investments, can find these regulations and go forward, could we compile something as a department, or is it too scattered? I know some of these regulatory structures are scattered, and is there something out there, or if not, can we make something?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I'll sure try. One-stop shop, I'm not sure that exists today, but we'll do our best to compile it better.
Committee. Okay, Director. So it sounds like you're working on this challenge, even though you just found out about less than 48 hours ago. It sounds like, and perhaps a good way forward is have an update at one of our committee meetings here, either in 2 or 3 months, as to the progress that you've made with Mr. Williams, and so we can continue to check in and see what the progress is and maybe some lessons learned if there are any. And so we'll kind of keep our eye on this, because like I said, we complain a lot about the feds, and we like doing that, but we also want to take into account the views of folks who are, like I said, new to this industry, or have experiences in other states. Maybe there's things we can learn from those other states, and always use these things for learning opportunities, I would say. And so hopefully that's agreeable to everyone here. Progress check either in September or November. Is that sound reasonable to you, Director?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And Mr. Williams, does that sound like an okay path forward for now?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your help.
Okay. All right. Very good. And I learn something every day in this committee. So thanks for your testimony. Okay. So looks like, okay, so we have one more public comment on Zoom. Welcome, sir. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Oh, looks like you're muted, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
I'm awesome at Zoom so far. I'm a rancher in northern Campbell County, almost on the state line of Montana. And I guess first and foremost, I'd like to thank the Weed and Pest for the efforts that they put forth so far. But I guess I'm looking for the Ag Committee to maybe give them some more tools to help us with prairie dog issues. And I'll just tell a short, brief story about what we've dealt with. We neighbor a rancher that's roughly has about 60,000 acres, and we're roughly about a 15 to 17,000 acre ranch with public land. And we share 20 miles of fence with them. In my estimation, they have not done their job or their due diligence in taking care of their prairie dog problem. In the past, the County Weed and Pest at Campbell County has spent about roughly well over $100,000 to cost share with that ranch to get rid of prairie dogs. And really nothing has been accomplished. They have about 18,000 acres of highly infested prairie dogs. So I guess in the essence of the whole deal is, and I'd listened to the testimony before about the fines and stuff like that, and what we can do to, and it's a tough deal because I know Wyoming is very important for private property rights, but I'm a little rancher that's being run over by prairie dogs, and I'm looking for maybe the state legislature or the Ag Committee to give the Weed and Pest some more tools for some enforcement, because as of right now, and I don't mean to be critical of the Weed and Pest, I feel like we're losing the battle on the prairie dogs. And with outside interests, as far as NGOs and environmental groups, we're so close to the Thunder Basin National Grasslands. I really feel like we have a short window to get some control and eradication of this pest. And I probably sound over dramatic in saying this, but we're losing a ranch to prairie dogs. And we've talked about Ncda, we've talked about leafy spurge. When I go to a weed and pest meeting, I think those things are irrelevant, because really where I'm sitting, we are absolutely losing a ranch and we're losing economic viability because of prairie dogs. And I know there's cost share programs out there, but there's not enforcement. For example, the neighboring rancher, all they have to do is show a little bit of effort, and then the weed and pest can't do anything. So in other words, if you have 18,000 acres of prairie dogs, all you have to do is go buy a ton of poison, scatter it out, and you say you're trying. Well, sometimes in life, as we all well know, trying isn't good enough. And I guess that's kind of my story. I've had to hire a lawyer to even get them to agree that there is a problem in northern Campbell County. But now I'm at wit's end because they've offered a cost share program, which is fairly decent, but there's no enforcement in it. And I know that, and not to cast stones or cast a shadow on this ranch, I'm trying to do this as positively as I can. They're not going to partake. So here I sit. I spend $5,000 to $10,000 a year repoisoning the same prairie dog towns over and over and over again. And by 6 months later, they're back again. And I've also seen prairie dogs, they're out traveling this time of year. And this is anecdotal, but it's kind of a funny story. We have this ranch that neighbors me has 14 miles of Highway 59 frontage. And it isn't uncommon to count 50 to 60 dead prairie dogs in their highway access from the prairie dogs moving. It's an unbelievable mess that we have in northern Campbell County. And I don't have the answers other than I would like some sort of an enforcement apparatus or something to make people, take care of their problems. So I guess I'm just asking for help, and I wanted to tell my story. And if anybody would like to contact me further, I know you guys are under a tight time constraint, but I appreciate the time. So that's kind of my story. If you have any questions, I'd gladly entertain them.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your time. Just a quick question so we're clear. This committee just kind of redid some of the statutes we have regarding, basically going on to somebody else's ranch and doing weed and pest control, but effectively against that property owner's will through the local weed and pest board. So just to be clear, you've gone through that process, it sounds like, if I understand it
Yes.
correctly. And so they've done some enforcement, but it's not adequate. And just make sure I understand that correctly.
I guess in my mind, there's no enforcement that's been done. They just, there was no enforcement done. There's been no fines. They came forward with a cost share program for the whole northern Campbell County. The Little Powder watershed is pretty much what I call it. And there was no enforcement of any kind. It was just, we're offering a cost share program. Well, the problem with that is, if you don't partake in a cost share program, nothing happens. And in all honesty, the fines are a joke in my estimation. If I wanted to give up on the prairie dog issue and, I'm spending a gob of money on it, I just soon pay the $2,500 rather than do all the work if I didn't care. You see where I'm going with that? So, and I know you guys are in a quandary there because of private property rights, but the weed and pest really you guys need to give them more teeth, more enforcement ability, because when you neighbor somebody like that, you're just ruining a ranch, And I lease from my family, and I spend a ton of money leasing this ranch, and I'm losing it. And I hope that you guys still find agriculture a viable industry. I think it's going away in Wyoming, but I really believe, and I'd love to have the weed and pest director answer this, I really believe that we're 10 years away from losing all ability to poison prairie dogs. And I think the battle is going to be over shortly. And I think time is of essence.
Okay. So any questions, committee? Okay, Director Franklin, you have any comments? I think we had some feedback about the $2,500 cap for the fine. And if you have no off the top of your head, last time that was raised, and forgive me if that was 2 or 3 years ago, last time we looked at this issue, but I think you even mentioned in your testimony that oftentimes, the cooperative agreement is enough, but I think we potentially have a situation where, you know, we have to do things that are uncomfortable or might, you know, that's been brought up that from one perspective that we heard that, you know, we might have to transition to the enforcement aspect of our statutes, which I'm understanding haven't really been used. And so maybe your perspective on that element.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Boardman brings up a couple of really good points, I guess, that, you know, I'll talk about. But first of all, your question on raising the fines, I will have to look back and see if I can find when it was raised. Certainly hasn't been raised in the 20 years I've been doing this. So, you know, there's 20 years at least. My guess is you're going to find that it hadn't been raised since the 73 law was enacted. That's my guess, but I'll certainly take a look at that. But I did want to bring up, you know, I think he brings up a really good point, not anything that I can have control over or anything, but we are seeing the EPA put the stranglehold on rodenticides that are associated with prairie dog control. You know, a lot of our rodenticides you cannot use other than the time between, I'm just going to probably get this a little bit off, but October through March. And then we're in a window now where a lot of the rodenticides cannot be used in these situations. So, you know, there's label restrictions on these products that we can't go out and use them annually or you know, throughout the calendar year. Now, there is one product we have that has a special local need label with the Department of Ag that gives it more of a flexibility around. But when you rely on one rodenticide, what you end up getting is bait shyness. And so you'll see where prairie dogs will actually avoid the bait if they find out, you know, they figure out that this is a operation to take them out, basically, then they start avoiding that, you know, that poison. So having, you need various products where you can rotate through the rodenticides that you have to manage them. In terms of more teeth, you know, you're going to have that local district board has that right now, the statute's in place, and that decision on how they go farther with that enforcement and that fine is within that board decision. There is a process for that landowner to, you know, take that and go into a, for lack of better words, contested case hearing or to challenge those findings. So even if you go into that enforcement section, you're probably not going to get that management in place, you know, in a very quick period of time. Now, one thing Nebraska has done, they did change their law, I think it was probably 10 years ago, is they have more of a, I guess, ability where that pest inspector can go in, if they determine that there is a pest problem, they can go in and do the work on the private land, and they put that on the tax bill for that landowner. You know, that's how they've tried to mitigate this issue. So that's definitely a lot more teeth than what we have. But, you know, it's certainly prairie dogs are going to be an issue and have always been an issue. I've always advocated the only way you're going to eradicate a prairie dog town is build a house on it. It's just the way it is. All you can do is mitigate that town and it will come back at some point. So I wish I had easier answers for him. I applaud all the work that he's done there. I've heard enough of this issue from the Weed and Pest Board. And, you know, they're certainly trying to find some solutions, but that's what we have with the statute right now that we can utilize.
Any questions or comments?
Can I disagree with a couple points?
What was that, sir?
I guess I'd like to disagree with a couple points and love for somebody to come,
excuse me,
for you, some of you.
Sir, sorry I didn't go over the protocol before you started talking. So make sure you get acknowledgement from the chair so we can keep, it's a little awkward on the video, but I appreciate you being here.
Okay, I apologize.
But just, yeah, just briefly, yeah, make it brief. We are focused on the process, and in your response, I guess I'd ask you a question is, have you pursued that enforcement avenue with your local board, and what has your been experience with that? I'd be interested in learning about that element of our statutes, how it's working out or not working out in your case. Go ahead.
Is that to me?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I've hired a lawyer, and I filed the complaint, and then, like I said, that all they came forward with is the cost share program. But I guess one thing I would like to say to the committee is I disagree with the last statement that prairie dogs can't be eradicated. We have lots and lots of towns that we get 100% control on, and you can find our property line from the air. We've done a lot of work with drones, and we are solving the problem. I think that's a fallacy to believe that we cannot eradicate them or at least get 90% control. The other question that I have for the committee, and this is probably not the time or the place, but I'm gonna go ahead and bring it up. There's a lot of these sections of ground that are state land that are highly infested with prairie dogs that are on this ranch. And pretty much the state land board or whoever is in control of that I talked to, the state is waiting for the plague to come, is what I was told. I guess if the state can't find better tenants, they should go ahead and give those state leases to the neighbors. I'm having as much trouble with this ranch as I am the state of Wyoming. The state of Wyoming is not taking care of their lands either. So that's another issue.
Yes, sir, you'll be glad to hear that we just moved the responsibility for weed and pest programs from state lands to the Department of Agriculture. And from our perspective, the first cuts they have to make are for programs like weed and pest. So that's the impetus behind that bill, and that hasn't come to fruition yet. That just passed a few months ago. So we were aware in general of that sort of dynamic, and have taken action to counter it. Just you may not have seen you haven't seen on the ground yet because the bill hasn't gone into effect. So hope that helps a little bit. I think we are interested in learning about the enforcement mechanism from a policy perspective. Just a quick calculation: if it was 1973 and we set that $2,000 limit, right now in today's dollars, that'd be about a little over $13,000. So maybe something that bears our consideration when it comes to the enforcement side of things. And certainly want to probably hear from Campbell County Weed and Pest as well as we move forward. Learning more about this issue. Thanks for the reminder that a lot of the bill that we had a few years ago dealt with the initial entry into the land, not necessarily the tail end of the process. So glad to hear apparently that the first part's working well, but it looks like we might have to consider the second here. So thank you, sir, for your testimony. Thanks for bringing these things to our attention. We're a citizen legislature, and if it wasn't for other citizens, we wouldn't really have a good idea of whether our policies are working or not. So we can look at.
Okay.
Yep, appreciate the input, and we'll. I think Representative Fortner is probably your legislator, so perhaps work with him primarily. And I think we got a couple of good options between what Nebraska does and what just simply raising the maximum fine. Those are easy things that come to mind. Maybe there's others. So look forward to continuing to work with you on solutions.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, any further public comment in person? So we got through all of our online folks. Anybody here in person want to testify in the Department of Agriculture? Okay, well, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Committee, any discussion about what we heard today from Department of Agriculture, AD&B, Weed and Pest? Nothing? No bill draft motions or anything like that? Okay, well, Representative Fortner, it looks like you have a constituent issue then. Look forward, if you need our help, we'll go ahead and let me know if you have any questions, okay? Okay, so thank you, Director. Mr. Franklin, thanks for your time. Appreciate the good work. Okay, now we're halfway through our, 12:30 agenda item. We got the Business Council up. So look forward to hearing about the updates from this agency, which we took an interest in starting last interim. And appreciate the work that they've done so far and really developing our ag business sector, and look forward to hearing the status update.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We will be providing, I'm Josh Durrell, I'm the CEO of the Business Council, and with me today I have Bert Adam, who is my investments director, and then on my left I have Josh Keefe, who is our finance manager. In the audience is Jill Tragimba, our agribusiness manager as well. I think you know all of these folks, and And Mr. Gimba will be giving an agency overview in September with more details about our agency. And so I thought what we would do today is, rather than spend a lot of time on my agency in general, I thought we would really take a deep dive and talk a little bit about the ag bonding authority that we were granted and how we're doing on that. Before we do that, though, I'd like to take just a moment, and in front of you, I believe you all should have a picture that says Reframing Economic Development. And I'd like to take just a moment to talk a little bit about the philosophy of our agency, and to talk a little bit about what I call our investment thesis. And that really is guiding, it's essentially a guiding principle for us to think about how we utilize state dollars to spur on economic development. And I say that with this always in the back of our minds. How do we build resilient communities? Because ultimately, that's what we want to do. You know, economic development for economic development's sake is not really what we're after. What we're after are resilient communities. And I think all of us have lived in Wyoming long enough to know that that living through the ups and downs in a community, while we can do it, and we're all tough enough to withstand those tough times, that's not really what we want to do. And if we're going to remain relevant in the future generations and make sure that we have opportunities for our children to come back and work within our communities, then we're going to have to be economically resilient. And so as we look at economic development, we think about it as sort of like a triangle. And if you really think about this, it's not that much different from the legislature putting forth policies and putting forth funding to make programs that work throughout our communities and work for many. But we look at that in the same way for economic development. And so if you take the budget that we have and the funding mechanisms that we have, as well as the policies that we have, our goal really is to create really good jobs within our communities and build the local economic development capacity within the communities in Wyoming. And what that means is, I would sort of like to work ourselves out of a job. Now, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because I don't really think that's the case. I think we'll always have new policies that we'll want to create. We'll always have ways that we want to incentivize economic development. But ultimately, I would like it so that all of our communities and counties across the state are so good at economic development that they don't know we exist, but we are like that invisible hand in making things happen. And I think that that is the best way to do it. We don't want to have the state controlling that. We want to have local control and enable our locales to be able to do that. And so that's why we look at this as a triangle. If the Wyoming Business Council can be working on policy and funding mechanisms that then the local economic development communities can utilize, then we're doing our job. But quite frankly, we're not there yet. And so what we're looking to do is, how do we increase that local capacity? Now, some of our programs do that automatically. Our Business Ready Communities programs, as we build amenities, as we build infrastructure, as we build buildings in communities, it has that effect of building local capacity, whether that be literal capacity or figurative capacity. And so our mission really is to continue to do that. And over time, we're going to be asking, and we've already worked closely with a number of committees to make sure that our policies are relevant, our policies are effective, our policies are clean, and maybe that means getting rid of some and adding others, and our funding mechanisms are utilized and work. And so I'm really glad that we're here today to be able to just sort of introduce this concept to you and talk about what we're really trying to do across the state, because it means that we're enlisting a number of economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, local leadership, really everybody to look at things from an economic development lens. And that's the goal with what we're doing. And so with the agriculture bonding, we're really excited about it because it's another tool in our toolbox. And we're excited about it, but at the same time, we're going to go into it thinking, this is a tool in our toolbox, let's figure out how to use it, let's figure out what application we can do with it. And then we'll reassess it over time. And I think that that's something that relationship between our agency and this committee can do. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to the investment brains on my team and to talk a little bit about that. And we'll give a bit of a background of where we are in the process, what we think is going to happen, but just know that it's really, really early and rules are being developed and so on and so forth. So it's really early in the process and we'll know more. And with that, unless there are any other questions, I'll turn it over to Bert and Josh.
Any questions so far for the Business Council? Hey, please proceed.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bert Adam, Investments Director for the Wyoming Business Council. I'm going to let Josh Keefe walk us through that first page of the handout that you guys have, and then I'll go ahead and walk you through the back side of that handout, or the second page, and walk you through the timeline.
Right. Members of the committee, Josh Keefe, Economic Development Finance Manager at the Business Council. You'll see here, we gave you a handout entitled Program Summary at the top. I'm sure all of you recall Senate File 9 that went through the latest legislative session, passed and was given to the Business Council to do revenue bonds for agricultural processing endeavors. Just to refresh your memory a little bit, think of taking some kind of raw product, whatever that might be, adding some kind of value to it to later sell to the consumer, perhaps up the supply chain, whatever it might be for redistribution. You'll recall that the maximum bond per project was $50 million with a maximum term of 40 years, and that the interest rate will be determined on a case-by-case basis, obviously depending on the strength of the company, and a wide variety of factors all goes into that pricing for risk. Also, one thing is that the size of the project still does have to fit into the SBA size standards to make sure that we are really trying to help those smaller processing units, and that does not exceed those as determined. I believe the regulation came out in 2019. And then ultimately, the final approval of the project comes from the SLID board, and that they have the final, we would work on the project, present it, structure it, but ultimately the SLIB has the final determination on whether they would like to allocate those bonds, that bonding towards that project. And so one other thing as well is that you'll see down there under the other program details section that the state of Wyoming cannot invest in these bonds. These will all be private market bonds that will be put out there for others to invest in. And so, with that, obviously, what's the Business Council's job in this deal? Really, what comes down to with us is that we will work with the company that may be seeking these bonds, making sure that we structure the deal the right way. We have adequate collateral, that they actually can service the debt, all of those things as well. And so, but again, ultimately, it's really up to those out in the market to decide if they'd like to invest in this project or not. And so, again, as Josh briefly touched on, just another way to try and help further the agricultural cause in the state and hopefully make things happen. So with that, maybe before I turn it back to Bird to talk about timeline, I'll be happy to answer some if there's any kind of technical questions. I can try to do my best here.
Any questions for Mr. Keefe? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Keefe, just a quick question. I know this bill hasn't come all the way out yet, but have you had any interest showed in this program yet, or is it still too premature to know?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I have not had anyone call me specifically about this program yet. I think it is pretty early still. I will be honest, I just sent my first draft of the rules to the AG's office last week, so I've been being more of a lawyer than a banker lately, I feel like, so I'm trying to learn everything I can.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll walk you through the timeline on the second page there. So as you can see, the bill SF9 was put into law in March of this year, March 22nd. We did start a public comment period to just get early feedback on this for what we should be considering. So we did that for 3 weeks. And then as Mr. Keefe referenced, he's been working on rules, and that's the timeline from April to June, getting the Attorney General working on that with us. June 22nd, we do have our public board meeting where our board will approve the draft rules. After that, they go to Governor's office for notice to proceed. We then go into public comment, 45-day period, starting early July, and going through August. And then if there's no substantive changes, we have a second public board meeting September 8th where we can adopt those rules. After that, they do go through LSO, Management Council, and Governor's signature, and that's a 75-day process. So at this point, we're looking at early December for rules to be live for the program. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Any questions about the rulemaking process, Representative Fortner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this plan something you guys drafted yourselves, or is it something that's been used in another part of the country? And if so, can you tell us what success it's been in other areas? Thank you.
And well, just a brief reminder, I mean, this is something we did last interim, and you can review some of the committee materials that led to the creation of this, which was an initiative of this committee, looking at ways that we can further, have long-term ways of increasing what we just heard, the short-term success of meat processing in particular. Now have 12 Usda plants, and we're just looking for other ways that we can continue to, build upon that success. And so I guess I can answer for the Business Council, since it was this committee that took the lead on that just last year. And we could go back to the committee materials, but industrial revenue bonds in general is something that are much better utilized in other states, more utilized in other states. And as a reminder, since there's a lot of misinformation out there, or some misinformation out there, these bonds ultimately rely on tax breaks to, help along these projects. So whether it be, local property tax or income tax, your federal income tax if you're a bank. So fundamentally, it says revenue bond. It's not like it's the government directly going into debt and somehow giving them a break based off that. We're giving a break based off of taxes. So underutilized in the state, much more success in other areas. And even the Revenue Committee had a bill that got all the way through the House. I think they actually would have allowed more flexibility for decreasing local taxes, for example. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that direction, but I guess I felt the need to answer that since it was kind of this committee's idea, and you didn't bring it to us, we brought it to you.
No, I think, Mr. Chairman and Representative Fortner, I think the rules portion is something that we are well versed in, and the rules would really just make it so that it's a little bit more accessible and follows the statute, but then is kind of how we would administer that program. So, and that's the process we're undertaking now.
Any further questions? Okay, well, I did ask the Business Council for just a brief update. You'll have a much more substantial one later in the interim. But just want to make sure you know if there's anything you have that we can help with, especially with ag, value-added, ag development, especially, like I said, looking to almost kind of pass the torch between the good work that the Department of Agriculture has done with building out these meat processing plants and helping that along, and maybe a more long-term vision with the Business Council doing something similar. We're all ears. Thanks for your work, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Yes, sir. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, just add a little bit here. I realize we're behind in time, so I'll try to go backwards if I can. But one thing I really appreciate your idea that, how do we work together on this? And one of the things that, we want to create primary great jobs in the state. And that means that we might have to look at ag in a little bit different ways. And we might have to look at some companies that are doing agriculture in slightly different ways in order to get that done. And I think that your willingness to work with not just our agency, but also to kind of keep that open mind of what does ag look like as we look into the next 20 years, I think is going to be really important as we start to talk about what does ag in Wyoming look like in 20 years from now. And so I just appreciate the start that we have and the fact that you're really focused on economic development, because I do believe there are going to be things that are coming down the pike that this committee can help with along those lines and to make sure that we're prepared for the future. And so I just appreciate the work there, and I kind of think about it as Team Wyoming. You know, we're a pretty small team in Wyoming in general, but I think when we think about ag, you know, we have folks on our team that are focused on it, but we also have this committee that can really think about how does ag look in today, tomorrow, and then maybe even further down the road, and how does our policy really enact what's going to make Wyoming ag successful in the long term. And so again, I appreciate the collaboration, and I appreciate the fact that you're looking out for us and how we can continue to make our communities resilient. So thank you.
Okay, any questions at all, committee? Okay, do we have any public comment on the business council as it relates to their ag development or ag business development? Anybody online? Anybody in the room? No? Okay, well, thank you for your work, gentlemen. Continue to work with you. And with that, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break and take on our last topic here. See you back here at 3:15. Okay, so our last topic for the day, we're up to 2:30 now with slow-moving vehicles. Wyoming wheat growers, this is something that your association brought. Certainly, we've heard some challenges, I think, especially in the eastern part of the state, but certainly something that could be statewide. So, Mr. Kennedy, good to see you on Zoom. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for accommodating me attending remotely today. Many, if not most of the committee, when we discussed interim topics, we looked at the handout that's available to you from the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, which essentially details what are called speed information stickers on or panels on the back of farm implements. And on page 6 and page 8 of that handout, it shows that sign which states the speed limit of those vehicles. If you'll look at Wyoming Statute 315921, it limits farm implements to 25 miles per hour. In 2005, the American Society of Agricultural Engineers implemented this standard, which allows vehicles, farm implements, to travel up to 40 miles an hour with the correct signage. So in other words, my tractor would have to have that speed information system sign that said 30, 35, or 40 miles an hour. And in addition, any implement that I might tow behind that tractor would also have to be rated. And this is also valid for self-propelled sprayers, harvesting equipment such as combines, forage harvesters, any of those vehicles. Wyoming Statute 315921 was last amended in 1984. This standard was adopted in 2005, and as new equipment comes online slowly but surely, we felt that it would be appropriate for us to change this statute to allow those vehicles that could travel greater than 25 miles an hour and up to as much as 40 to be allowed to travel at that speed, and that our statute would allow that. I have looked at, and there is an Ohio statute, and I'll give you the reference, 4513.11, and section G actually has language that's very similar to what we would like to see. And essentially it adds another section that allows vehicles that display that speed information system sticker, or SIS as it's called, to travel at other speeds, at those higher speeds. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would welcome any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Kennedy? All right, well, simple enough to ask, I guess. If I understand it correctly, with the proper signage, you want to allow our farm implements to go up to 45 miles an hour, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the upper limit is 40 miles an hour. I don't believe there are any of those either power sources or implements that are rated to travel above 40 miles an hour.
Sounds like a challenge, Mr. Kennedy, but we'll keep it at 40. I shouldn't say that with Highway Patrol in the room. Okay, so any questions for Mr. Kennedy? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll stay on, and if you have any further questions, thank you.
Great. All right, looks like we have folks from the Department of Transportation. Come on down.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Shannon Ratliff with the Highway Patrol. I'm the interim administrator. I have with me Captain Dan Wyrick. I don't know that we're going to be able to add a lot more to this discussion other than, we certainly understand that, the newer equipment and with newer technology, that tractors are traveling faster. That's a more efficient means to get from, A to B and get the job done. Understand the concept of marking the vehicle so that everyone understands that this vehicle can travel faster than 25 miles per hour, to include the public and enforcement. Applaud the idea. I guess if there are any questions, we'd take any questions.
Any questions? Yeah, I appreciate your, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
So if we were to adopt legislation, could we just deal with the slow-moving vehicle sign and not, because we've got a lot of old equipment that's really all there is, and we just deal with the speed for the slow-moving vehicle sign? Okay, then other equipment would then just be grandfathered in as it is. People wouldn't have to update a whole line of equipment is where I'm going.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, correct, yeah. Okay. Your old equipment, old equipment is near and dear to my heart, so I don't want to blaspheme old equipment, but yeah, you would keep your triangle, and you wouldn't be affected by this. If your equipment would go faster than 25 miles per hour, or if you have old equipment that would be able to maintain a speed faster than 25 miles per hour, then that would certainly be a discussion you could have. And it's our understanding that the Ohio legislation requires the triangle as well as the SIS, the circle, the other emblem, to be present both at the same time on those pieces of equipment.
Okay. Any questions, committee? Hey, well, I appreciate your presence. We're mostly here to make sure that whatever bill draft we come up with is, able to be administered. Hopefully it's a simple enough concept, and I think we might see what that Ohio statute looks like exactly, but certainly want to make sure that whatever we do works in real life, and that's why you're here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so Wyoming Farm Bureau, you're up. Your thumbs up. Is that your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, I think this is a great idea, because the way I read the law now, that if you're going above 25 mile an hour, you shouldn't have the slow moving vehicle sign. So I think moving this up to a more appropriate speed is a great idea. I think it's going to improve public safety, and I think that's our biggest concern, is to make sure the public's more safe. And with that, I'll try to be uncharacteristically brief and sit for any questions the committee may have.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Moline, in Ohio, they did the SIS as well as the slow-moving vehicle just for those that have the capability of going faster above the 25. So is this your opinion, that you would rather just change the legislation on the slow-moving vehicle sign and that encompasses all, or would you rather have the additional sign for those few implements or few tractors that can exceed that speed limit? Which would you prefer, the dual signage or one sign with a higher speed limit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it sounds like to me the simplest thing would be to just move that 25 mile an hour up to 40, but I think there's already regulations concerning about proper lighting, and that you cannot exceed the speed of the vehicle. So my old M tractor that can't do 40, that's going to be covered, but I still have to have the proper lighting if I'm going that much below speed. But I think the only thing in the statute, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the only thing we would need to change would be that speed. And I wasn't very brief, was I? I apologize, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
You have, it seems like, yeah, it's under, the impression to ask was to have sort of bifurcated system, those for solar vehicles and those for slightly faster vehicles. Do you have a preference on how we go about doing this?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer that we do have this bifurcated because the absence of the speed information symbol means that the vehicle isn't rated to travel above 25 miles per hour. And there are new implements that are not rated above the speed of 25 miles an hour. So as far as public safety, I think it would be better to add an additional portion to the statute that allows vehicles that implements that display the symbol to travel at those speeds up to 40 miles an hour and leave the 25 mile an hour limitation in place for implements that only display a slow moving vehicle emblem.
Mr. Chairman, I bow to the greater knowledge as shown by Mr. Kennedy.
Okay, thanks for specifying. Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, gentlemen. Is there any further public comment? Do we have anybody else online? Looks like, unless somebody's hiding behind a pillar, it looks like we don't have anybody else in the room. Okay, so going once, going twice, public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
I would move that we, I guess I would move that we do a bill draft for our next meeting that would expand the speed of the farm implements to up to 40 miles per hour. And I'm not sure as I'd change it from that.
So moved and seconded to have that bill draft. So to be clear, you want based off the Ohio statutes, is that as suggested by the wheat growers, or?
I don't know. I'd have to look at those.
Okay.
If we did that, then maybe at the next meeting, we'd amend out what we don't like in the Ohio statute. Maybe we just do that whole thing and see what works best for Wyoming.
Okay, so broad discretion to work with the wheat growers and highway patrol, make sure we have something that's workable.
Yeah.
Is that?
That would work.
Go ahead, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that we're careful with the older tractors and all that don't have lights on them other than headlight and implement light to the back or something, you know. We start adding a number of things to what has to go on, and I think we put ourselves in a hardship. I've got two tractors that no way in the world are going to have those things on them. So for us poor farmers, we'll say, let's be careful.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of like the way that Ohio approached this problem in that there are very, very few implements or tractors that can go at that speed. So let's not move everything up to the level of 40 miles an hour, but those that are able to, let's put a different signage on them. Because for decades now, since I was a little boy, we've had the slow moving vehicle sign, and everything's been designed around that. To take that signage and change that now, we have to re-educate the public as well as the farmers and ranchers. So most of our implements are designed for 25 miles an hour or less, and the lights and everything designed for that. So I think I'm more in favor of let's just leave that as it's been for decades and put an additional sign on those few vehicles, tractors, that can go above that. And then if they try to pull an implement that has a SMV on it, that gives the highway patrol an indication that, yeah, the tractor can go 40 miles an hour, but what about that implement they're pulling? It may not be designed for that.
Okay, all very good input. Any more discussion, committee? Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay, that takes us to the end of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I was unclear on whether the vote then turned to be like the Ohio State with additional signage or just increasing it to 40.
I thought it was additional signage, so.
Okay.
Somewhere Ohio.
That's why I was starting to write, but I wasn't sure that there was consent on that. Okay, great.
Okay, anything else? Questions, comments, side remarks? Okay, good. We're adjourned.